My mom said this happened back when she and my dad were still dating, approximately 27 years ago in Cleveland, Ohio. Let me also start by saying my mom is super conservative and a proud goody two-shoes. She doesn't drink, never done drugs, has never even smoked a cigarette. She was about 21 years old and was leaving my dad's house in the middle of the afternoon. This is what my dad said, because she actually has no memory of leaving his house. She remembers sitting on the couch with my dad watching TV, and her next memory is being in a car on a central road in Cleveland. The road was busy as usual, dozens of cars. She says that hovering just above that road about 30 feet up was a massive ship or something. She describes it as being sand-colored, potato-shaped, with no visible metal seams or screws or anything, just smooth all the way around. She said it was making absolutely no sound whatsoever and had no lights, just floating above the tree line. And the weirdest detail, the back end of it faded away. She compared it to the tool on Photoshop that can create a translucent fade to nothing. I asked her if anyone else saw it. I mean, a major road like that in a big city, I would imagine cars would be crashing into each other when people saw this thing. She doesn't know. She said she couldn't look at anything other than the object, which is scary because she was driving. She could physically move, but she just chose to stare at the object and has no idea why. She made several turns on the road, allowing her to see multiple sides of this object, and confirms that it was for sure three-dimensional. She drove under it at one point. Apparently, the next thing she remembers is being lost. She didn't drive to her house. She drove to the middle of some weird area of town because she was so focused on this object. She compared it to the feeling of when you're driving and thinking intensely, and the next thing you know, you've arrived at your destination and barely remember the drive there. She said she called my dad from a payphone and asked him for help, but she had no idea where she'd driven to. She told him all about this massive tan object in the sky and how she was magnetized to it. To this day, he confirms that just by how upset my mom was, he knew she wasn't making this up or playing a trick on him. I've done some basic Googling to see if anyone reported this in Cleveland around that time, or if there was some kind of blimp in the sky. Haven't found anything yet. If anyone has any ideas or thoughts, let me know. I can ask my mom next time I talk to her for more details if anyone wants more info. In regards to the question of, has she said when she lost track of it? When she called from a payphone, it was no longer visible and she hadn't seen it vanish per se. Her response via text, it was flying in a very odd way, here and there, slow then fast, and as I got out onto the highway it zipped away towards the west, and I could no longer see it. My mom just texted me this sketch of the scene. She is not a good artist, my mom's drawing. My mom texted me saying, I'm glad someone out there cares about my story. To this day, I have very horrifying dreams about that huge item in the sky coming to Earth. It is not a good dream by any means. I wonder if they're brought on by my sighting. So it started in 1994. I was around 4 years old. My family and I had gone to my grandmother's house. As we walked in the front door, I saw a short black creature standing behind the Christmas tree. I didn't freak out immediately, was mostly curious. We all moved into the living room, and as we were sitting on the couch, the creature kept walking past the doorway and would stop to stare at me. It was slightly shorter than I was at the time, with really thin arms and legs and beady eyes. It had ears kind of like a cat that stands straight up, and tufts of black hair in between them. I became increasingly terrified, broke down into hysterics, but no one else could see this thing. Eventually, it walked out of sight out of the doorway, and I didn't see it again. And for years afterwards, my mom would bring up the spiky Tasmanian devil, as I called it, but everyone, myself included, brushed it off as imagination. About 7 years later, I was staying the night at my friend's house with her adult son and 2 adult cousins. We were in the living room watching television when we heard this loud slam against the sliding glass door. We turned on the porch light, and standing there was my childhood nightmare. The back porch had bookshelves and a pool table and some various boxes. This thing had thrown a book at the sliding glass door. Everyone was freaking out, and one of the others called my friend's mom to come home immediately. We noticed the door wasn't locked, and as soon as we flipped the lock, this thing went nuts. It raced around the back porch, throwing things, knocked over the shelf, and slamming against the sliding door. We all hid back in the living room, scared out of our minds. The way it was hitting the glass, I'm still surprised it didn't break. By the time Mom's friend got home, it was gone and left a complete mess in its wake. I hardly slept for weeks afterwards and was constantly afraid, but felt validated that I wasn't imagining things as a toddler. The last time I had an experience with this thing was my sophomore year in high school. My childhood friend Katrina was staying the night. In the middle of the night, she started screaming, waking me up. When I finally got her to calm down enough to tell me what happened, she said she'd woken up because she thought she heard my bedroom door close. She said when she rolled over to look at me, there was a small black creature sitting on my chest. It had both hands on my shoulders, like it was pinning me down. She said it turned its head to look at her and then ran out the door when she started screaming. When she described it to me, it was the same creature I'd kept running into. Katrina called her mom shortly after and went home. We remained friends, although more distant, and she refused to visit my home or speak much of what happened. If anyone can tell me what this is, or has had any similar experiences, I'd greatly appreciate it. It's been several years now, and I haven't had an experience with it since, but it's always in the back of my mind that this thing will show up again. This story didn't happen to me, but to my friend Jolie I knew back in high school. We lost touch over the years. It's been over a decade since we graduated, so unfortunately I can't follow up with her about it. But I still wonder about it from time to time and thought you guys might enjoy. One day I was over at Jolie's house for a school project we were working on, and it was my first time to ever be inside of her house. One of the first things I noticed were 3 picture frames in the living room that didn't quite match with the rest of the decorations. The pictures were pretty low quality, like the type you would take on those disposable Kodak cameras everyone used to buy in the 90s. They each featured a dark road with strange blurs of orange lights hovering in the middle, kind of like if you were to take a picture of a neon light as quickly as it passes by. Curious, I asked my friend what these pictures were all about, and she kind of tensed up and got really quiet. She tried to change the subject, but that only made me more interested, so I kept pressing her until she finally caved. Before I go on, I want to tell you that this girl was not the type to make up crazy stories about ghosts, aliens, etc. She was a very straight-laced honor student who went to church every weekend and was basically the most boring teenager ever. So what she told me was extremely out of left field compared to our usual conversations. She told me that when she was younger, she thinks that her family was abducted by aliens. I laughed and thought she was joking, but the look on her face said otherwise. She remained quiet, but of course I started begging her for more information. She told me that she doesn't like to talk about it. In fact, no one in her family did, with the exception of her father. Apparently, her father was obsessed with it and was responsible for taking the pictures and later framing them on the living room wall, and her father is apparently the one who has more than a vague recollection of the encounter. According to her, their family was on their way home from vacation on a late-night road trip in the middle of nowhere when they saw a bunch of crazy lights coming toward them. Her dad pulled over and stopped the car to take pictures of what he believed to be a UFO. The only thing my friend and her mom and sibling remember after that is seeing what she described as some kind of gate with a bright light. Suddenly, the family found themselves sitting in their parked car as if they had all just woken up from a deep sleep. It was still dark out and they were still in the middle of nowhere. Obviously confused about what had just happened, they drove onward to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. That's when they realized they weren't even on the same road they had been on when they encountered the lights. They finally got to a gas station to get directions and discovered they were now about 2 hours away from where they had been earlier when they pulled over, completely off the path they had originally been heading in. They had no idea how they got there, and that's all she was ever willing or able to tell me about it. So, I'm a teen at this time going through a bit of a rough patch. I'm at my grandma's house to celebrate Christmas, a 2-story building which is old, rusty, and filled to the brim with spiders during the winter. It's a nice house, but some rooms in it creep me out. The stairs, for instance, have always been nightmare-inducing for me. They had a door at the bottom of them that was operated by a weight so that it would slowly close as you headed up the stairs. This was unnerving for me, especially when I was younger with short legs. The other room of note would be, of course, the attic. It was dark and full of spiders, lit with a single naked bulb in the center. My sister and I were banned from this room, and I have always suspected it because they thought we would break 90% of the fragile contents inside of it. The door to the attic was located inside a closet and always had a large board pressed up against it. This closet happened to be located in the room that my sister and I were sleeping in that Christmas. Usually, we stayed in the room to the far left of this, but due to arrangements with other relatives, we were booted into the confined space. From that first night, I felt that someone was watching me. It was hard for me to sleep, and I spent most of the night straining to hear any noise. Nothing supernatural happened until a couple of days before Christmas. I was up later than everyone else, making Christmas cards for people with headphones in. I was making one for my then estranged father and had the Dead Island theme blasting into my ears, because being a teen I had to make it dramatic. Slowly I began to realize that there was another noise, and I took a headphone out to listen. It sounded like the wind at first, but it was coming from inside the house. It took me a moment, but then I remembered the attic actually overlooked the dining room where I was making the cards. I looked up at the little window that was fitted in the attic, but didn't see anything. I stopped the music and waited. As suddenly as it had begun, it began to fade. It was then that I realized that the music was what had caused it to get its panties in a twist. If I had been at any other point in my life, I would have at the very least switched to a different song. But I was stubborn. I wanted to listen to that song, and now I wanted to listen to it on repeat. I put it in, and for the next hour I refused to remove it while I worked. This was a mistake. When I was finally finished and removed the earbuds, the room was awash with a horrible screeching, and now the pans of the windows were being hit repeatedly. I am still surprised to this day that no one was awakened by the noise. It was then that I turned the music off, but that did not dissuade the shrieking and clattering. I told it to shut up, but for some reason that didn't work. I tried to reason with it, but it just got louder. Finally, I did the only thing I knew from experience would work. I let my dogs into the house. Gradually, the noise decreased as my dogs paced around the kitchen, and finally all was still. That night I could feel anger radiating from the closed attic door. In the morning I realized that this could not go on. I did the only thing I could think to do. I apologized to it by means of a Christmas card. I made 3 separate cards, one which I put behind some boards in the dining room, one which I slipped under the crack in the stairs, and one which I put inside the attic. The one in the attic was the one I worked hardest on. I apologized for playing the song on repeat and asked if we could call it a truce until Christmas was over. Then I slid it under the door. I don't know what I experienced that night, But after the card, I never felt a single scrape of malevolence from the rest of the house. The room was peaceful and I no longer felt eyes on me whenever I slept. In return, I never played that song on repeat in that house again. If I learned anything that Christmas, it was that sometimes trying to make peace with the monsters that hide in your closet does work. I hold this story responsible for my continuing fascination with the unsolved and unexplained. It has become part of the culture of our family. Growing up, I can recall many family get-togethers going late into the night, retelling different accounts, discussing possibilities. Since then, I've carried on the tradition as well in telling my friends. It's a story that's meant to be told at night, a standing story, at least. My father and I can never sit while telling it. I'll never know what really happened that night, nor will my father, my grandmother, or anyone in Wall Township, New Jersey for that matter. It's been over 2 decades since it happened, and I feel a desire, a responsibility even, to write and share this story with the hopes that others will appreciate it as much as my family and friends have. I wasn't born yet. It's the summer of 1987 in Wall Township, New Jersey, my father's high school graduation night. He is out with his friends celebrating. At home is my grandma and her young daughter Jen. They live on a corner lot in a small ranch in a quiet suburban neighborhood along with their dog, Brady, who is outside in a backyard pen that is located on the right side of the house. My grandma decides to drop something off at a friend's house just a few minutes away and leaves Jen at the house for a short time. While alone, Jen is in her room. On the left side of the house, when the first strange occurrence of the evening happens, she hears the crunching of leaves outside her bedroom window. She knows Brady is in her pen and that this is no animal out there. This is distinctively a person's slow and deliberate footsteps, right there under her window, cautious steps, trying not to be heard. Jen doesn't dare look out her window for fear of what could be out there. Instead, she hides and waits for the sound to stop. Eventually, it does. It doesn't trail off, it just stops. Was someone still out there, being still as could be? My grandma comes home and Jen is obviously frightened. She tells my grandma what happened. I consider my grandma to be a brave lady. She checks throughout the house and then looks out the windows. Nothing. Not too much cause for concern. It could have been anything. Time for dishes. My grandma is washing dishes in the kitchen, which is on the left side of the house. There is a window directly above the sink. The evening hasn't quite turned into night, and the sun is still lingering, as it tends to do in the summer. Over the sound of the water running, my grandma hears something that she could still imitate to this day. A heavy, raspy breathing. It seems to be coming from below the window outside. Imagine a long-term smoker gasping for air, a deep and frightening sound. 2 and 2 are put together. There has been someone outside for quite some time. There was someone there while she was away at the store, and that someone must have been there when she checked around the house. Someone she didn't see. A fear sets in, and before the sound can stop, Brady, whose pen is about 30 feet from the kitchen window, goes crazy, barking like she never has before. Like I said, my grandma is a brave lady. She decides to go get Brady. She advises Jen to lock the door after she steps outside, and for Jen to only open it when she sees her mother return, running up the back stairs with Brady on a leash. So on the count of 3, she makes a run for it. Jen locks the door and waits there for what seems like an eternity. Around the corner comes my grandma with Brady, bolting up the back steps. The second Jen lets them in the house, she slams the door behind them and locks it. Without missing a beat, the 3 of them retreat to my grandma's bedroom, which is located on the back right side of the house. Before Grandma even has a chance to gather her thoughts or call someone, there are voices coming from the side street out her bedroom window. A relief rushes over both of them as they realize these are familiar voices. My father and his high school buddies, Jeff, Drew, Mark, Chuck, 5 or 6 teenagers all together, crammed in a small VW, laughing and joking, obviously drinking and having a good time. in all of places right under his mother's nose. However, the voices quickly turned panicked, shouting, "Oh my God, what is that? Oh my God, now there's 4 of them!" That's what my grandma and my Aunt Jen were hearing coming from the car. After a couple of minutes, the shouting is directed from the sky to the left side of the house, the front left outside Jen's bedroom. Clearly, it's something much more frightening than what they had seen in the sky as their shouting gets louder and much more panicked, and someone yells, "Let's get the hell out of here!" With that, tires squeal as the car full of teens bullet forward, makes a sharp right, and tears down the long open road ahead. My grandma stands frozen at the window watching them as they grow further and further away from the house, away from whatever horrifying sight they saw. Then, unexpectedly, she saw a blur of bright red brake lights glaring in the distance. The car full of boys had stopped, but what for? It was a road surrounded by woods on both sides. Why would they stop in a wooded area after being so scared? Then, she realized they were making a U-turn, heading back toward the house. In a desperate attempt to signal the boys to pull into the driveway and come into the house, Grandma runs to the front door and begins to flicker the outside light switch on and off. The car is speeding so fast she wonders if they'll even notice the signal. But at the last second, the car makes a quick turn into the driveway. Doors fly open and 6 boys emerge in a massive sprint across the lawn, all 6 of them reaching the front door at the very same second, climbing under and over around my grandma, and then someone pulls her inside along with them. They slam the door shut, lock and bolt it, and all of them, out of breath, shaken to the core, each telling their story over one another. Above the power lines, it was a ball of light. It was spinning very fast, spinning until the yellow ball turned red hot. Then it splits into 2 separate balls, then 4. Then the bottom right one spins until it's red again, until the 4 join back into 1. They weren't sure how long they watched this pattern go on. It seemed so surreal to them. They continued. Then I said, "Look at that," said Jeff. And now we see, leaning against the house, a figure. Mark chimed in, and for all their accounts, something was very not right with this figure. Imagine a silhouette of a man, not darkened beneath the shadows of the night. No, this figure was bright white, all white from head to toe. Was the man's skin white? Or was he wearing white clothing that covered his head like a hood? They couldn't quite tell. They say it seemed to be standing and leaning against the wall of the house very casually, almost as if it was observing their reactions to the globes above their patterns when they hovered in the sky, not very far from the man's position at the corner of the house. The man in the white suit. "I started to yell at the guy," Jeff said, "but Drew floored it and we peeled out. Then we're coming back toward the house," George said, "and we see the lights flashing. We thought that the lights in the sky was making the electricity flicker in the house, but someone yells, 'It's your mom!' They realized my grandma was flicking the lights to get their attention, and they knew they couldn't just leave her and my aunt there alone. So they stormed the house. My dad and his friends aren't sure if the lights in the sky or the man in white were still there or not when they ran for the door. They were so panicked and focused on getting inside, no one really looked. I don't think they wanted to. My grandma opens the front door and is met with a group of teens bursting through the doorway. One friend goes through my grandma's legs just to get inside the house a split second sooner. The story ends pretty anticlimactically. My grandma told the boys they could party as much as they wanted in the basement, and she'd cook them a big lasagna dinner, as long as they promised not to leave the house. But first, she calls the police and tells them about the crunching and the rasping sounds and the dog barking. She doesn't want to tell them the other details because she doesn't want them to question George and his friends who had been drinking underage and illegally. 2 police cars pull into the driveway. The boys sit quietly out of sight while my grandma talks to the police. There's a knock on the front door. It's one of the policemen. We search the entire yard, around the house, and around the shed, along the row of trees and bushes outside the perimeter of the house and the yard. But if you should hear anything further, just give us a call back. Like I said, we'll never know exactly what it was that happened that night, but the story spread quickly and became a legend in Wall Township. Years later, when I was a little kid, my dad and I were watching a show on UFO sightings together. They showed a film someone had taken of UFOs spinning balls of light in the sky. My father jumped out of his seat and yelled, "That's it! That's what I saw!" The film was taped in another city, I don't recall where, perhaps even out of the country. Unfortunately, it was a quick clip and we were unable to tape it. All I could say is the man in the white suit and the glowing spinning balls of light in the sky that visited my family's house in 1987 continues to intrigue and inspires me to keep an eye on the sky and to share the story with others. At the time, I was recently out of the Army and started working for the Department of Defense. My ex and our kids had just moved into a home we rented right outside the outskirts of Leesburg, Virginia. Nothing out of the ordinary, quiet neighborhood at the end of a cul-de-sac and off a road that connects the town with a main highway to Washington, D.C. down south, and a rural road that runs all the way to West Virginia and the Appalachian. This was the summer of '09, and at the time I only had 2 dogs and not 3 as I do now. Before our furniture arrived from my last duty station, we basically had to live with a few items and sheets in an unfurnished home in the basement. Now, the home was a 70s type tri-story home, single level in the front yard, and a 2-story with the basement walkout in the backyard. This thing literally looked like it was from the 70s show, between the thick shag carpet and solid wooden panel walls in the basement. Now, I'm usually the type of guy who goes off his gut feeling and instinct, and the first thing I noticed on my first night there with my ex and kids was as we slept in the basement, it just felt off. It literally felt like someone was watching us sleep. I chalked this up to being in a new home and being unfamiliar with the location, plus exhaustion. So I fell asleep with no issues and forgot about it over the next few days. Once my household goods arrived, we settled in. Things seemed to be normal for a few weeks. Then, in midsummer, things started happening, slowly at first. My ex would complain that in the evening or at night whenever she went downstairs to grab items or do laundry in the basement, she could feel something standing behind her and watching her. She became so unnerved that she would block the small window looking out into the backyard at night. Because she told me, "I feel like something is watching me in our yard." Now, granted, my yard is not huge, but it's about 1 acre to 3/4 of an acre in size, and has a steep drop-off near the back towards the neighbor's yard and the adjacent golf course. At around this time frame, a good friend of mine with his wife needed a place to stay, since their home they were renting was going on the market to be sold by their landlord, so they stayed with us for a few months until they found a new place. At this time, I did a lot of traveling and would be gone for several days at a time from my home. And mind you, my army buddy is the same one that deployed with me 3 times to Iraq. This guy is definitely the last person to be shaken, let alone be intimidated by anything. When he moved in, things definitely went up a notch. The first really creepy reoccurring thing began when our front door would become unlocked whenever we came home after grocery shopping. A quick trip to the gas station, or just for a walk down the street. At first I blamed my ex for not locking it, then after a second time I watched her lock it. A third time I locked the door myself. By the 4th time I decided to grab my sidearm, and when I came home and the door was unlocked, I asked my ex and the kids to stay in the driveway as I cleared my home. My biggest fear was that someone was watching us to rob us and or just messing with us. So you can imagine it was unsettling and felt surreal calling out to a non-existent person in the home, as I meticulously cleared it out with my handgun. After checking everything, I called an all clear and we all came inside the house. We decided not to tell our young kids to not scare them at first because we were not sure what was going on. When we were discussing at dinner with our friends who were living with us, his wife told us that Tom went out to get some gas for his truck while my ex and I were away with the kids for the weekend. Tom came back 5 minutes later and saw that the door was just slightly propped open and unlocked. So fearing just as I did for a break-in, he grabbed his sidearm and searched the house, and did not find anything. Second time, Tom and his wife went out to dinner, came back 2 hours later, same deal, door slightly ajar and unlocked. Now, Tom is a guy who is almost borderline OCD when it comes to little details, so I know for a fact he locked the door and so did his wife. The more unsettling events started happening while I was gone for about a month. Right before I left my ex, I went out to dinner and left the kids at home with Tom and his wife. We had a pretty good time and decided to turn in for the evening prior to my long trip. When we came home, Tom was actually waiting up for us with his wife. Tom told us that after dinner the kids went to bed. Tom and his wife were in the next adjacent bedroom when after about 25 minutes they heard knocking on the wall. So Tom's wife called out to the kids to cut it out and to go back to sleep. And the knocking stopped. A few minutes later, this time Tom calls out to them to stop it again. Once again, the knocking stops. A minute goes by. This time yet again, but louder and more forceful. So Tom gets up and opens the door, walks down the hallway to the next bedroom and swings open the door. Kids are all asleep, away from the wall and racked out. As he is standing there again. So Tom grabs his handgun and clears the house thinking someone is inside. His wife tries to dissuade him, but he did it anyways. Not having found anything, no more knocking that night. A few weeks later, I had come back from a road trip. At that point in time, Tom and his wife moved out into their own place. The door, wall, tapping, knocking stopped to an extent, and so did the front door randomly unlocking itself. By this time, it was early fall, and at that point in time, I would decompress by playing on my PC later on in the evening. Now, I wear headphones when I play just because I use VoIP and TeamSpeak when I do. This evening, I was just jamming out to some Pandora. Everyone was in bed, so I started playing my games. I guess what happened next is best described as if you were doing something, you begin to hear a side conversation, almost like a murmur, like people talking in whispers and hushed tones at the library. The kicker is, of course, I'm in a game session with music going plus headphones, but I was not mistaken. I could hear a conversation going on, just barely audible and unintelligible at the same time. I slowly took my headphones off and shut the PC off. Absolute silence. So I turn it back on and go back to gaming. Again, I start hearing a conversation. So this time I think, okay, long-corded headphones, maybe I'm picking up an FM or AM station, so I switch out to cordless USB ones. Same thing happens again. Finally, I unplug my headphones, shut down everything, and put my headphones on. Silence. And then after a minute, once again, a very, very quiet murmur and talking. It was unnerving because I couldn't tell if I was imagining hearing things or if it was real. To say the least, I did not want to put my headphones back on and hear the murmur again that evening. Next morning, I asked my ex if she had heard anything while I was gone for a few weeks. She told me she could hear, just barely, a man and a woman very softly talking. Couldn't make out words, but could tell it was a man and a woman. Didn't seem upset or angry, just very, very soft talking. If you tried to listen to it, it would go away most of the time. So I finally decided to look up any history on the area. What limited info I could find was that the town I lived in was very old. Originally, the area was inhabited by Native American tribes, primarily the Sioux tribes, until the area became Leesburg around the 1930s or 40s time frame. But interestingly enough, when I typed in ghost in Leesburg, it turns out that the town is quite haunted. According to the locals, there are a lot of haunted tours as well. No info on the house itself, though. Finally, things started picking up during mid-fall. At that time, I decided to get another dog, and after picking him up from the local pet store, we brought him home to wander around and explore the property, and to meet the other dogs. Now, it's one thing when you or another person feels or experiences something, but it's downright creepy when your pet sees or senses something that you cannot, and they know it's there. So a few days in, I noticed all 3 of my dogs never went into the basement. Even if a toy dropped down the stairs, they wouldn't go down there. So I decided to head downstairs and bribe my dog with a treat to get him to come down. Nothing, nada. Dog just sat there looking at me from the stairs. Calling over didn't work. Hell, even a strip of bacon didn't work. So I decided, screw it. I grabbed the dog and carried it downstairs. Let me tell you, it was a big German Shepherd. And let me tell you something else. I have never heard an animal whine with so much anxiety in my life. As soon as I sat him down, the dog bolted. And I mean it literally bolted up the stairs. My 2 other dogs refused to come down either. This is in broad daylight with everyone home, mind you. I didn't tell my ex or the kids. I did not want to spook them. Another time, my boxer was staring off into the hallway when my ex and kids were out of town visiting her relatives as I stayed home. I just finished cooking dinner for myself when I sat down on the couch with my food on my plate. As I sat down, I heard a distinct noise that could be best described as someone smacking their lips and sniffing real loudly. I instinctively called out to my boxer to cut it out. Then I realized my dog was still outside in our backyard with the others. So I went out back and got them, and as I came in, my boxer stopped at the hallway and just stared. I looked where she was and I could see nothing, but I have never ever seen a dog, let alone mine, stare like that. Literally staring, not moving and not even blinking. I had to call her name twice to make her snap out of it. Whatever it was creepy because of the way she ever so slightly cocked her head to the side and stared at something I could not see. She was not upset or growling, just staring very intently. A few days later, I would say the most personal and unnerving experience happened. It was quite late on a Saturday night. My ex and I were having a few cigarettes and some whiskey out in our 3-season porch overlooking the backyard. It was late. We had a few drinks in us. Kids were in bed. We were having a good time. I asked her if she wanted anything from the kitchen before I went and got a refill. She said no. Now, our kitchen and dining room are right next to each other, and our dining room leads out into the porch and backyard. Only thing separating them is a screen glass door. The glass door was open, but the screen was shut so we could hear the kids inside if need be. So I stood up, walked right through the dining room, took a right into my kitchen. Standing there, I started pouring myself some Jack Daniels and a Coke. Then I hear the pitter-patter of feet on the wooden floor. Kind of the same sound that a small barefoot child would make if they were walking or running along the wooden floor. Thinking to myself it's one of my kids being out of bed, I casually call out to them, "Michael, go back to bed. Mom will be upset if she sees you out here. You know better than that." I paused for a moment, didn't hear anything, and continued pouring my drink. Again, I hear the pitter-patter of little feet on the floor, so I mutter under my breath and call out, "Michael, you better be in bed by the time I walk out there." So I finish pouring my drink to give my son enough time to scout to bed. I slowly walk out of the kitchen and into the dining room, and then take a left out into the hallway connecting all the bedrooms. Absolute silence. I make my way to the end of the hallway and open my kids' bedroom door. All of them are passed out on the ground in a tangle of blankets and toys. I bend down gently and try to reposition my son to see if he's fake sleeping or if he darted into the bedroom before I stepped out into the hallway. Right as I am down with him at face level, I hear footsteps immediately behind me in the hallway, slowly receding. It happened so suddenly I didn't turn back in time to see what was there. I literally froze in disbelief. The steps walked away from me towards the end of the hallway where the basement entrance is. What happened next made my skin crawl. The steps stopped, and I heard the distinct click and pull of my basement door handle opening, followed by the slow and steady and very unmistakable noise of my basement door creaking open, and then followed by much larger adult-like footsteps descending down the basement stairs very slowly, almost casually, followed by the door ever so slowly closing and the sound of the door handle being pushed down gently so it can click the door shut. In that moment, I flew out onto the porch where my ex-wife was and stammered out, Did you just hear that?" Her look made me realize how startled I looked to her. She told me she did not, and at that point I said, "Fuck it, I'm done with these games." I marched downstairs and turned the lights on and called out, "Whoever you are, whatever you are, I do not care. This is my home. I live here. You do not, dead or alive. This is my family and my place, and there is no room for you. Now please, leave." My ex stood next to me looking at me like I was insane. Well, lo and behold, from that day until we moved out 4 months later due to a new job, absolutely nothing else happened. I tried setting up a tape recorder and a digital voice recorder downstairs for several days with nothing on it. Whatever it was left as soon as I had enough of it and confronted it. For me, it was a happy ending. Whatever it was did not seem malicious, more like it enjoyed messing with us. Ironically, our children only heard the knocks once we talked about it a few years later. It was only myself and my ex that would hear other things going on. Ever since then, I have not had any experiences at all whatsoever. In fact, I did not have any experiences prior leading up to these events. All I can say is I went from a skeptic to a believer. Not right away, of course, but that last event made me a believer. To this day, I can still remember the door creaking open slowly and deliberately, and those enunciated loud adult steps going down the basement stairs. Hey guys, thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the Nightmare Army. I'm always looking for new soldiers in my Nightmare Nation. So guys, I hope everybody has a great Friday, and I hope everybody has a great weekend as well. My weekend is pretty much consumed with Final Fantasy 15, Shameless, and Channel Zero. I swear to God, my nights this past couple of weeks have been Shameless, Channel Zero, Final Fantasy. It has been just, oh God, it's been a nerdgasm of craziness. But I don't mean to go off topic here, but I recently, as I was editing this video, was watching the movie The Neon Demon, directed by Nicholas Winding Refn. I hope I said that right. And I'm not gonna lie, a lot of his movies are really screwed up. I mean, I've only seen Drive, Only God Forgives, and now this movie, The Neon Demon, and some of his movies are just so screwed up. I mean, I do like his style and his direction. I do like some of his movies, especially Drive being one of my favorite, which is probably everybody's favorite, but just some of his movies, I mean, especially seeing The Neon Demon, I was just like, what in the hell? If you guys haven't seen it, I mean, if you like some of his films, or if you like, you know, kind of art housey films, definitely give that one a look. It'll screw with your mind pretty much, that's all I'm saying. But anyways, guys, thank you all for watching, and just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.